Right now, every single time a conflict erupts in Iran or the broader Middle East, the entire global economy instantly holds its breath and looks at one incredibly tiny, incredibly fragile spot on the map, the Strait of Hormuz. Located directly between the rocky coasts of Iran and the Sultanate of Oman, this narrow waterway is the ultimate energy jugular of the planet. At its absolute narrowest point, the navigable channel of this strait is only about 33 kilometers, or roughly 21 miles, wide. Yet through this tiny geographical bottleneck, tens of millions of barrels of crude oil pass every single day. For decades, military strategists, energy economists, and politicians in the United States and around the world have stared at this map and asked one incredibly logical question. If this 33-kilometer stretch of water is so dangerous, and so vulnerable to being shut down by a regional war, why don't we just bypass it? Why don't the vastly wealthy nations of the Middle East simply pool their resources, dig a massive canal straight through the Arabian Peninsula, and completely eliminate the threat of the Strait of Hormuz forever? Welcome back to US Geography. Today we are answering that exact question. We are going to explore the monumental, terrifying geographical hurdles of building a Middle Eastern mega-canal. We are going to break down the sheer physics of moving supertankers through a burning desert, the impenetrable mountain ranges standing in the way, and why the map dictates that the global economy will always remain an absolute hostage to the Strait of Hormuz. Before we can talk about digging a canal to replace the Strait of Hormuz, we have to understand exactly what this waterway actually does. This is not just a convenient shipping lane, it is a literal bridge of total global energy. When people think of Hormuz, they primarily think of crude oil, and they are right to do so. Thousands of colossal cargo ships and oil tankers navigate this incredibly tight corridor every year, carrying the lifeblood of the industrialized world. But it is not just crude oil that makes this geography so vital. It is also the primary transport route for liquefied natural gas, or LNG. Look directly to the south of the Persian Gulf, and you will see the small peninsula nation of Qatar. Qatar is one of the single largest exporters of liquefied natural gas on the face of the earth, but geographically, they are entirely trapped. Nearly their entire supply of LNG, the gas that heats homes across Europe and powers factories across Asia, must pass through the Strait of Hormuz to reach the open ocean. If this strait is sealed off by military action, naval mines, or a localized conflict, the world does not just experience a temporary spike in gas prices. The global supply chain practically halts. This geographic vulnerability is exactly why, since the paralyzing oil crises of the 1970s, global energy strategists have been desperately sketching out ways to bypass the strait entirely. The most daring, audacious idea to emerge from these strategic panic sessions was beautifully simple on paper. Just dig a trench. The idea was to construct a massive artificial mega-canal that would carve its way straight through the Arabian Peninsula. The geographical goal was straightforward. You start the canal somewhere along the coastline of the Persian Gulf, perhaps in Saudi Arabia or the United Arab Emirates, and you cut a path southward, completely bypassing the perilous waters of Hormuz, until you connect directly with the open, safe waters of the Arabian Sea or the Gulf of Oman. If a vessel can load up its cargo in the Persian Gulf and sail down an artificial waterway directly to the Indian Ocean, the geopolitical threat of Iran closing the strait vanishes overnight. Oil exporting countries could move their product freely, completely independent of the tensions brewing in Tehran. When you look at a highly zoomed out map of the world, this sounds like a perfectly reasonable infrastructure project. After all, humanity has conquered geography before. We sliced through the Americas with the Panama Canal, and we severed Africa from Asia with the Suez Canal. Why couldn't we do the exact same thing in the Middle East? The answer to that question begins with the sheer terrifying scale of the distance. When we talk about legendary human engineering, we have to put things into perspective. The Suez Canal in Egypt, which is universally considered one of the greatest and most vital infrastructure mega projects of the 19th century, is roughly 200 kilometers long. The Panama Canal, a project so incredibly complex that it completely changed the trajectory of global trade between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, is actually quite short, only about 80 kilometers in length. Now, let's look at the Arabian Peninsula. To successfully bypass bypass the Strait of Hormuz, depending on the specific route that engineers might choose to take through Saudi Arabia, the UAE, or Oman. This hypothetical mega-canal would need to be approximately 900 to 1,000 kilometers long. Let that number sink in. If we make a simple mathematical comparison, a canal designed to avoid the Strait of Hormuz would have to be 5 to 10 times longer than the most impressive marvel of engineering canals currently existing on Earth. The sheer scale of the construction work required would dwarf anything humanity has ever attempted. It wouldn't just be the infrastructure project of the 21st century, it would be the largest artificial geographical modification in human history. But distance is only the first geographical hurdle. The second, and far more lethal hurdle, is the actual topography of the land. When the Suez Canal was dug, engineers were incredibly fortunate. The majority of the land they had to cut through in Egypt was relatively flat, low-lying desert terrain. When the Americans built the Panama Canal, they had to carve through mountains and jungles. But the distance was mercifully short. The Arabian Peninsula offers no such geographical mercy. A 1,000-kilometer canal here would not simply be a straight trench dug through soft, compliant sand. This region is a highly complex, fiercely rugged topographical nightmare. To reach the Arabian Sea, this canal would have to traverse arid plateaus, shifting dunes, and most terrifyingly, the Hajar mountain range. And the Al-Hajar Mountains in Oman and the eastern UAE are not gentle rolling hills. They are towering walls of jagged, compacted rock that soar to heights of over 3,000 meters. If you were to dig a sea-level canal through this region, you cannot simply scoop away the dirt. You would literally have to blast, fracture, and carve your way through miles of solid, ancient bedrock. It would be the geographical equivalent of trying to dig a navigable shipping channel straight through the heart of the Rocky Mountains. And what exactly are we trying to float through these mountains? We aren't building a canal for small sailboats or regional ferries. We are building a canal to serve the undisputed titans of global energy trade, very large crude carriers, or VLCCs. These oversized oil tankers are true monsters of the ocean. A standard supertanker can measure anywhere from 330 to 340 meters in length. To put that into an American perspective, that is the length of more than 3 entire football fields placed end to end. Their width can easily exceed 60 meters, which is wider than a football field. When fully loaded with up to 2 million barrels of crude oil, these ships displace an astronomical amount of water and sit incredibly low in the sea. For a behemoth like that to move safely through an artificial trench without its hull scraping the bottom and causing the greatest ecological disaster in history, the canal must have a staggering minimum depth of at least 30 meters. But depth isn't enough. These ships are clumsy, massive, and take miles to come to a complete stop. To allow for safe maneuvering, avoiding oncoming traffic, and handling emergency situations, maritime calculations suggest the channel surface would need to be approximately 200 to 400 meters wide. Now, let's combine all of these terrifying geographical numbers. You need a trench that is roughly 30 meters deep, up to 400 meters wide, stretching for nearly 1,000 kilometers across mountains and plateaus. To create this void, engineers would have to physically excavate, relocate, and dispose of tens of billions of cubic meters of earth and solid rock. To make that visually comprehensible, the amount of land that would need to be dug up and moved is mathematically equivalent to flattening an entire small mountain range. And you have to execute this unprecedented labor in one of the most hostile climates on the planet, operating massive heavy machinery and deploying tens of thousands of workers in the Middle East is vastly different than building a bridge in a temperate, peaceful climate. In the summer, as the ambient temperatures in this desert routinely skyrocket to 45 or even 50 degrees Celsius, over 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Furthermore, you are digging a massive water channel in a region where fresh water is historically scarce. Canals suffer from evaporation, especially in a scorching desert. Keeping a 1,000-kilometer trench filled with enough water to float a supertanker while the sun aggressively evaporates it every single day is an atmospheric and geographical impossibility without constant massive water replenishment. When you take the 1,000-kilometer distance, the towering mountains, the 30-meter depth requirement, and the brutal climate, you arrive at the ultimate killer of the mega-canal dream, the cost. Even the richest oil-producing nations on Earth have their limits. Let's look at recent real-world data. The recent expansion project for the Panama Canal, which was just widening an existing 80-kilometer route, cost approximately $5.7 billion. The recent expansion of the Suez Canal cost around $8.5 $5 billion. If you attempt to dig a 1,000-kilometer canal through the bedrock of the Arabian Peninsula, the preliminary estimates become almost comical. Experts calculate that the base construction cost alone could easily exceed $500 billion, with many projections soaring straight to the $1 trillion mark. That is roughly equivalent to the entire gross domestic product of a mid-sized developed nation, poured into a single ditch in the sand, and that is just the cost to build it, maintaining the structural integrity of the canal walls against desert landslides, managing the highly complex drainage systems, and providing round-the-clock military security for a 1,000-kilometer choke point would cost billions more every single year. Because digging a canal is too geographically complex, too environmentally hostile, and vastly too expensive, the nations of the Middle East realized they had to find a different solution. If you cannot float the oil over the geography, you have to pump it across it. Instead of a mega-canal, nations invested heavily in massive overland oil pipelines that cross the desert. This is a vastly more effective, realistic method of bypassing the Strait of Hormuz. For example, Saudi Arabia constructed the massive east-west pipeline. This incredible piece of infrastructure is about 1,200 kilometers long, connecting their incredibly rich oil fields in the east directly to the Yanbu port on the Red Sea in the west. This pipeline boasts a flow rate of approximately 5 million barrels of oil per day. This means that if the Strait of Hormuz is completely blockaded by Iran tomorrow, Saudi Arabia can still securely export a massive portion of its crude oil by pumping it to the Red Sea. The United Arab Emirates executed a very similar geographical bypass. They constructed the Habshan-Fujairah pipeline, which is approximately 360 kilometers long. This route safely transports oil from the deep interior of the UAE directly to the port of Fujairah. Because Fujairah is located on the Gulf of Oman, completely outside the Persian Gulf, supertankers can load up their oil without ever having to sail through the perilous Strait of Hormuz. This pipeline has a capacity of roughly 1.5 million barrels per day. Thanks to these massive pipelines, a significant portion of Middle Eastern oil can successfully bypass the geographic trap of Hormuz. But pipelines have their limits. They cannot pump everything, and they certainly cannot accommodate the massive, specialized LNG shipments out of Qatar. Therefore, a massive portion of the world's energy still absolutely has to sail through this narrow 33-kilometer choke point. While the idea of a 1,000-kilometer mega-canal connecting the Persian Gulf to the Arabian Sea sounds like the ultimate triumph of human engineering, the reality is that the map simply will not allow it. The terrain is too hard, the distance is too vast, the climate is too brutal, and the politics are far too complex. For the next several decades, and likely for the rest of our lifetimes, the Strait of Hormuz will retain its irreplaceable role. It is a narrow, fragile waterway, but it is the undisputed energy artery of the entire planet, and that is exactly why even a minor military tension, a single drone strike, or a small collision in these specific waters is enough to make the entire world hold its breath. Thank you for watching US Geography. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the engineering impossibilities of the Middle East, make sure you hit that subscribe button, like the video, and share it with someone who loves maps as much as we do. What region of the world should we analyze next? Let me know in the comments below. I'll see you again next week.